Hey, how you doing? Um, Welcome back. Post New Year's. I wasn't gonna do another video for a bit. I mean, that last one was, well, you got to see an hour of it if you actually watched it. I mean, it's not bad for the background, but I can't say the soundtrack does much for me, right? um, yeah, that was a New Year's one. It took an hour. Well, that's the film time I showed was an hour. Um, some stuff just isn't quite that interesting, but I had rituals to do. All right, so anyways, it's a long way saying welcome back. Happy 2024. Um, or Bahumbug if that's your thing. Now I'll have to say the first beer of 2024 for me is this. It's called Flying Dog, right? Flying Dog brand, and it's called Family Drama. It's an Imperial Pilsner, 9.5%. Good stuff. So, what are we talking about tonight? Well, I was actually messaging somebody about that New Year's Eve ritual, and it. I thought for sure that I had done a video about the spiritual path, the spiritual pillar, like step one, right? And I thought for sure I had done it. Maybe I did it and just forgot. Maybe I did it and then scrapped the video because I didn't like something about it. This isn't going to be terribly long, but the I guess I'll have to set that part aside. The what I want to get across with the spiritual pillar, I guess step one or initial steps, however you want to think about it, is that it's kind of like a combination of gift giving and I don't want to say worship because I started with demonolatry means, and so I'm not inclined to worship anybody. Respectfully honor for sure, but worship no. But that wasn't always the case. So when I started with this part of my path, this pillar, if you will, it was just Sakate came to me, and I didn't know it was Sakate. Right? I had no freaking idea. I just knew she wasn't gonna whoever it was wasn't gonna let go, and so I was really struggling with what the hell am I supposed to do. I had no idea. I always said I was spiritual but not religious, and this kind of meant that when this came up, I literally just couldn't ignore it anymore, and I knew she wasn't going away, which is a pretty good reason to try to figure out what you can do, right? I mean, you know, she was an uninvited. Well, guest isn't the right word because you kind of invite guests, right? But I guess she was an uninvited guest, but more than welcome, and still is. Of course, she was the first full-sized idol I ever bought was hers. So, but I didn't know what to do at the time, and so naturally, being part of the growing up as a Mormon, and just the JCI structure as a whole, because I had friends, most of my friends were not Mormons. It's like this is Utah where there's a sizable population. This was Indiana and farming communities, and you're not going to get necessarily a lot of Mormons there. You do get a bunch of Bible thumpers though, and so I kind of was exposed to some different beliefs from my friends, and at least in high school, anyways. And so I kind of looked at that when she came, and I'm like, all right, I know she's not evil. I know she's not going away, and I knew I didn't know what the hell to do. So what was I going to do? And well, first I kind of want to figure out kind of who it was, and then maybe that would lead me. And so what I ended up doing was, this has relevance. So I ended up going over a list of goddesses and using my gut because I had been listening to my gut. Right? I listened to it in Iraq, listened to it as a kid. we're on pretty good terms. And so eventually I had it narrowed down to 3. And the first was Nyx. The second was Hecate. And the third was Persephone. And so I had no idea what I was doing, right? Completely scared. I was scared. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I've walked through minefields, literally, and I was scared, right? I mean, how do you face something like that, right? And so so finally, I still remember sitting there in the kitchen there in Hawaii, and I'm like, Nyx. I mean, I couldn't think of what else to do, right? So I'm just saying, Nyx, if this was you, please let me know in my gut, one way or the other. Please let me know. And I thought it was a no, but I wasn't quite sure, right? I was like, shit. Really, I was like, God damn it. I was really hoping I was going to get a win right off the bat, because you would when you're scared. It's certainly unsure. I mean, it wasn't like I was like shaking like a leaf or anything. It's not like that, but fear is fear. And so then I called out to Kate, and it was a much stronger response. And then I was like, all right, well, that's it, right? I knew, but then I was like, wait a second. If Nyx answered when I called, and Kate answered when I called, they had to have been waiting on it. They had to have known I was going to call on him. So if I don't call on Persephone, I mean, that's pretty damn rude. You know what I mean? Do I want to incur the wrath of someone like Persephone? Not that I had tremendous knowledge about Persephone. I really didn't. Right? I didn't study any of this. I wasn't prepared for it at all. And so I just said, Persephone, I don't believe this is you, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. And I felt that it was like a no. So there was some relief, because now I had something out. Like I could at least put energy towards, effort towards, understanding towards. And that's what led me to this first pillar. And so what this first pillar is I may have started using the mechanisms and points of view of demonology, right? And Hecate tolerated that from me. She would tolerate it from I don't want to say from anybody, because I can't really speak for at that level, but she tolerated it from me, and she would have continued to until she was going to put my foot in my ass, because eventually it wasn't too long until it became, because I was like, please let me know what I can do, because I went straight to worship. That's what I was taught as growing up, straight to worship, right? It's like, all right, she wants worship. I don't see that I have much of a choice. She doesn't feel bad to me. I feel like there's a reason for this, although I had no idea. And sometimes I still don't. Well, I get bits and pieces and I have ideas and whatnot. But, total end game with everything from A to Z, no, I don't. I still don't. And so it became, I got that feeling that she didn't want worship from me. So what was I going to do? Well, that's actually what led to that respectful honoring, but not worship, is what led to that pillar, this first pillar, the spiritual pillar. And oh no, it's a little lopsided. I found the little leg on here that was missing from the one, but the table itself isn't level, so it may not. Oh, there it goes. You can't see it, but so that led to, well, what should I do, right? Where do I go? What do I look at? So I looked up Hecate. I'm like, all right, well, I'm not into goddess worship, because I don't believe you should worship gods or goddesses like that. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but for me, I didn't believe that was my path. I don't believe in overcompensating from either a masculine or feminine perspective is healthy. It doesn't seem to solve anything really, because it's still not the integration, and that's really what the end is about. is about honoring both in different ways, because they have, you know what, that's a different topic, right? That's a different topic. So what I started doing for her, because I was like, well, what the hell am I going to do for goddess like Hecate that, you know, leads the dead back to, you know, to safety, that helped Persephone, which was kind of ironic, right? And it's like, what the hell am I going to do for a goddess that I don't know, I can't talk to, and I'm not supposed to really worship so much? What am I supposed to do? And so I thought, well, I can at least do something for her, and I can sing, right? And the nice thing about singing, it was actually a really good choice, because they don't care how well you sing, right? I mean, once upon a time, I could sing actually really, really well, like all state choir, you know. I could sing really well, and I grew up doing it. That and playing instruments, I play several. So what was I gonna do, right? Okay, I can. Well, that's a different story. But so I'm like, well, what the fuck can I do? I've got time. I'm sitting in traffic in Hawaii. It's over an hour each way to work. The whole island is only 28 by 30 miles, right? And I was going like maybe 19, depending on which direction you looked. And so I had time, but I only had time in the car. So what could I do, right? So I would sing to her. And so there was a song, in the blog post for this is going to come out on the 15th, actually, January 15th, because I haven't scheduled some of them in advance. So the song will be there, but the song is really kind of irrelevant, because I had that car had a 6-disc CD changer, and it was an older car. And so I would just load it up, right? And so one of these songs on here kind of made me think of her, and I felt that it was appropriate. Although some of the imagery, I was still kind of stuck in the whole, you must say everything completely right, or, you know, God's gonna, in this case, goddess is going to just get real shitty and pissy with you, and be upset, and that's, yeah, that might be some of the way that the Christian churches, and I can't speak for the Muslims or the Jews, because I didn't go to any of their churches or have any really close friends with them, but that, you know, the fire and brimstone approach, that's not kind of, I could tell that that's not what it was. And so I would literally repeat that song until I could sing it almost perfectly daily. Like as in, I'm avoiding traffic and still making my offering with intent and feeling, and I was like, oh well, I should put intent and emotion and thoughts behind it, and those are all really good things. They are secondary to traffic safety, which was easy when we were only going like maybe 30 miles an hour, because there's just too many people on that island. And yes, I am probably going back. It's like 90%, but so that's what I did. And so I would sing to her either in the morning, but if I was in a really shitty mood or something like that, or real pissed off, then I wouldn't sing to her, because it wouldn't feel right. And so then I would do it in the afternoon. But I tried to do it daily. I didn't do it every day, because I wasn't on my commute every day, and I would feel guilty about it, literally. I mean, it seems kind of silly, but it's just, I'm that way. I have I don't want to say have a routine, but I have a set of expectations of myself. And if I don't meet those expectations, like I haven't done my incense offerings right now for Hushien, the Fox Immortal. And I am going to feel guilty about having not done those incense things, those incense offerings with phrases and things like that, until I do them, right? And that's just part of me. So I would always make sure I would do that. And then when she said, hey, I want you to introduce you to this other spirit, right, which happened to be Leviathan. I didn't have a song for Leviathan. She just wanted me to practice evocation with Leviathan, so I did. And then the third spirit that came around literally was Belial. He burst into a ritual, and I could tell Hecate didn't really want him there. She wanted a little bit more time before I was introduced to Belial. But then the next person that I started singing for was Hel, 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 the same spirit I have the the cow skull, well, excuse me, the deer skull from Molokai for as an idol. And so then I would sing to her, and then I would sing to another, and then I would sing to another. Well, what this ended up doing, though, singing for these entities, is that it curries favor in a way that just lighting a piece of incense and walking off doesn't. Right? It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be great or anything like that. Here, excuse me. You just have to give it with genuine intent. Now, if you keep doing this over a period of time, like I sang to them, at one point I was doing 6 songs plus a day, and eventually I finally said, please, I need to double some up because I'm running out of time, and I only have 6 CDs, and half the songs on these CDs are not necessarily appropriate, we'll say. And so we would double it up. Then it became a general offering, and now like 5 years later or something like that, when one of those songs, because I have them all now on MP3 and updated cards, you had to get rid of the old one. It did its time, right? I was like 20 years old. So now I have them on MP3, most of them. And when they come on, I just sing. And so I sing for all of them, not just any particular. But there are a couple songs where they're only for specific entities. But generally speaking, I still do make those offerings, but I don't have to make as many now because it's, I did it for years, right? And what that does is it actually curries favor, and it starts the kind of gift-giving cycle. Now that's kind of common, I think, if I remember right, in heathenry, because heathenry, if at least at the time that I read about it, it's kind of a gift for gift sort of thing. And I don't encourage taking quite that approach, right? I don't mind giving multiple gifts, but I can't be the only person only giving gifts, right? Eventually something kind of has to come my way. Whether it's, hey, they're going to introduce me to another spirit, or if I'm unsure with my evocation practice, like I've called on Akate or Belial before, because I've sung to Belial too. And I said, hey, can you validate or verify this spirit for me? So I was really unsure, and really, well, that's I'm about to go off on a tangent. And really, that's kind of the approach that I would take with the spiritual pillar is you're building a relationship, and it's not necessarily like I'm going to struggle talking about what that relationship is, because it's respectful, and it's acknowledging of their station, right? It's acknowledgement of what they mean to you. And that can change over time, and that's perfectly fine, because what you mean to them may change over time too, right? And that's a kind of reciprocal thing. It's not like you have this relationship with them and it's always that deep and it's always that pure and it's always, you're always going to work with them all the time. That's really going to depend on your path. And I got to be honest, I wasn't really going to work with anybody else but Hecate for a really long time. It just, I worked with Belial, but it wasn't, I didn't get really deep with him at that point in time, because that just wasn't the relationship I had with him. And so she literally had to say, no, you will now call this spirit when you sing, and you will now sing to this spirit instead. And she literally had to tell me that, because I was still stuck in that mentality that I had to, the worship mentality. Even if I wasn't prostrating myself and oh, holy, holy, and all that, I was doing that. Internally, I kind of was, and that could take some time. Obviously, it took me some time, right, to kind of get over. And I suppose you could argue that I'm still not over that, because I'm deeply grateful for her. I still am. I still honor her. She usually is a guide on my path rather than working with me directly. but that doesn't mean that I still care for her deeply in a really respectful way, right? It's not like we're not gonna, this isn't a love boat, right? I mean, it's not quite that way. But I'm very deeply grateful to her, and I'm sure she knows that. And sometimes I really wonder, well, shit, how long has it been since I made an offering to her? Because I'm just so wrapped up in what I'm doing, and helping other people, helping myself, um, all my daily obligations with my rituals and stuff. Have I spent enough time? And it's kind of silly I mean, it's genuine, but it's kind of silly to think about it like that. But I do, and I think about with all of them that I have relationships with, like Pazuzu, for example. I may only do one ritual every 6 months or something, right? But then as soon as I go to travel, man, he is right there, because we built that relationship up, before. Um, I just don't have the time now to sustain that type of similar activity, but it doesn't matter because I've built that relationship up, and that's really what you're doing with the spiritual pillar, this first one, right? You're establishing relationships, you're building them, generally speaking, over time. There should be some give and take, but sometimes it's going to be a little bit more give, and sometimes it's going to be a bit more take. I mean, that's the way that goes, and I can't dictate how somebody else's relationship is going to go, because that's inappropriate for me to do. Just as it's inappropriate for somebody else to tell me, hey, no, it's too long for this and that. Well, it's kind of, and sometimes that may be the case, but usually that's a learning experience, right? So the spiritual pillars can be a bit harder because it does take some time. It does take some genuine intent. It takes a spirit that's going to be reciprocal with you, not necessarily like we're not talking about some kind of like deeply passionate love sort of thing. We're not talking about that. I know some people have those relationships. I don't. That's between you and that spirit. Doesn't bother me. I get it on some levels, right? But that's not the relationships that I usually curate, because those aren't going to be the healthy ones over time, right? And maybe in short bursts or something. Maybe there's something for me to learn from that. Maybe there's some unlocking to be done, because one of the things that you typically get out of longer term relationships with entities that are respectful on both sides, not just one, right? Is you've heard me talk about attunements. Well, that's the way to get them. If you need favors, things like that, that's the way to get them. But you got to put the work in, and that doesn't mean you slave away blindly. That's why we introduced this gift for gift sort of thing. It's just not necessarily a one for one, right? And there have been some spirits that I sang to for a really long time before I really got anything out, and I wasn't upset about that, because another spirit that I had, a good mature relationship with, mature in a lot of ways, right? Had said no, it's okay, keep going, and so I did, out of trust. So in the spiritual pillar, you're really needing to build those relationships, whatever that relationship is, right? Maybe it's a guide. Maybe it's some hanky-panky or something like that. But if that's the only part of that relationship, I would probably kick that shit to the curb, because that's not really going to get you what you need. Okay, my opinion, and I will state that if that's the only way you interact with another spirit, I would get rid of that spirit, or I would call another spirit and say, hey, keep this person in line, or what, because that can be beneficial to people in different ways. And that's why I said, if that's the only way this happens, there should be other things involved. There should be other things you gain from that. Because there could be some healing done with that. If you've had a troubled past in that area, I can see some healing being done from that. I really can. Both emotionally and otherwise, mainly emotionally, but spiritually in some ways too. Especially if you were kind of taken advantage of in, like some of these people were in spiritual circumstances, you may need you may need some comfort in that area, and they may provide in that way. But that really should not be the bedrock of the relationship at all, right? Now, if you're talking about an incubus or succubus that you know is an incubus or succubus, then different story, right? That's kind of that is usually the largest. I'm trying to think of too many different exceptions at the same time. That's usually the point of those relationships in a way, right? Now, those they can go off in different directions, right? And they actually can be elevated past that that need to where they can generate some of the stuff on their own. But that's a different thing. That's not the type of entity we're talking about here. We're talking about gods, goddesses. Now, some people like Huxian, the immortal fox, is an immortal, and that is not a goddess or a god. It's like I don't want to say a step or two, but it's a little step below. It's not quite the same thing as a god or goddess. I'm not saying they don't have power. It's just in that folklore. I know that it's not at that level, but I'm not sure about some of the details, and so that's why I'm saying it that way. But here, the spirit pillar is all about respectful ways of interacting with spirit. And I would encourage you to look at some of the demonolatry ways. Now, you have to understand that they use the term evocation and invocation differently than pretty much the entire rest of the magical community. And so, like when I was in the demonolatry forum or the demonolatry subreddit, they might get a little pissed because I said evocation. When I always mean, respectful evocation, because if it's not respectful, I'll fucking tell you, right? And there have been some that have not been respectful. You got to earn it, though, because that is not the way I like to play things, but I certainly can. And they may not take it that way, right? It's kind of stupid that they have their own terminology for it. Maybe that's just the way. I'm assuming that's the way the really Connolly's the lineage that she married into defined it that way for whatever reason back whenever that was that it got started, and so they just never changed it. And she has such a widespread influence on demonolatry, the topic, that that's the way that is. So keep that in mind. Like if I say invocation, right? I'm largely talking about a respectful calling, right? If I say evocation, it's probably going to be respectful. But invocation for demonolatry is like partial possession, right? Yeah, it could be full, but that's got invocation like bringing in, right? And so or I may have just switched that shit up. Hold on. Evocation to them is exceptionally rude and disrespectful. Probably because some of them don't seem to understand that there are different levels of evocation and ways to go about it. Right? If I evoke an entity into a triangle because that's the first time I'm telling this entity, and I know that this entity is a problem child, well, I wouldn't now, but back in the day, that's fine. And if they behave themselves, I would literally remove the triangle. But the triangle can act as an area of focus, and not just as an area of imprisonment. But that's a leap that some of them won't make, and so I guess what I'm really saying is just kind of keep that in mind. So usually when I'll say, I kind of evade those terms altogether, and I'll just say, hey, I'm going to respectfully evoke, which I'll you got to preface it with a respectful, or I'll just say, hey, I called upon, or I called out to. Yeah, that's right. I did mix that up because invocation for them is basically what evocation is for me, and most of the rest of the world. Invocation, for them is a respectful calling. Invocation for ceremonial is partial possession, right? Well, not necessarily the entity, but the properties of the entity. I mean, you can go down rabbit holes with that, but just be aware that when you look at those demonology resources, that some of the ways they use some of these terms might differ a little bit, and that's how that system is. So that's fine. You just got to kind of keep it in mind. Some people might get a little shitty with you because that's the one power card they have to play that day or something. or they have a, you know, they think they own some kind of spirit, so therefore they have to defend it, which is cute, but you know, we don't own the spirits. So, anyways, got off on some tangents and a little bit longer than I expected, so my apologies. But I kind of wanted to give some idea of what this first part is. And this one is this pillar is going to be a little bit harder because how do you define the rest of the steps, right? How would you define them? That can depend on the person, but I'll put some thought into that because there are different levels and different ways I've gone about this that could prove beneficial, and they were stepped and they were done consciously. So I'll probably go down that route when we get around to making step 2.